This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
Hi, everybody. You're watching Talking Hardcore. I'm George.
I'm Scott.
And this is
I'm
our
Matt.
third member, Matt. He's no longer a frequent contributor. We have taken the advice of our vast demand of our fans on the Discord channel. They have basically told us Matt has to be a member, and his mom wrote in a lot. So we figured it was a good idea. And she's probably our best audience member. So thanks, Matt's mom. Now he's official, so you'll have to buy some merch when it comes out, Matt's mom.
Thanks, guys. I'm
Okay.
honored.
You've
Really,
been
and thank you
accepted
to
into
the
the
Discord members who
Who made
for
us.
me. It's really cool.
Yeah, we had to do it. It was the popular demand was beginning to drown out all the other talk.
Except this isn't a democracy, George.
Yeah, we gave in.
You have to rule
We gave into
your
the rule of the
podcast
mob.
with an iron fist.
We gave into the rule of the mob. That's what happened. Okay, so we'll get right to it. Today we're going to talk about two classic hardcore history episodes. Hardcore history episode 24, which was called Classical Hanson, which came out in November of 2008. And then the other classic hardcore history episode we're going to talk about is called The Dyer Outlook with Gwynne Dyer, which came out January 20th, 2009, which is the day Barack Obama was inaugurated.
Mhm.
I had to look that up, but it's the day.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we are going to go over these episodes in the way that we always do go over old school hardcore history episodes. If you haven't listened to those episodes first, you can go find them on Dan's website. You can buy the episode or you can buy the whole series. Check them out. These are different than a normal hardcore history episode. Most hardcore history episodes are talking about, Dan is talking about a historical event. Okay. He is interviewing two actual historians.
Yep.
And man, is it a time capsule. He interviews two historians in 2008 and 2009, and now look back from everything that's happened since then, and it's fascinating.
About 15, 16 years ago now, which is crazy.
It's
It's crazy.
17 years ago. For the one, almost 17.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Dyer.
You're right. 16 years and a couple of months. Okay. Anybody else want to have some thoughts on that first? Who wants to start?
I don't know. You're talking about before we started recording. You're talking about how the first one, Classical Hanson, kind of relates to modern day events. And wasn't he talking about how ancient democracies like Athens were easily swayed by demagogues and susceptible to internal decay?
I found both of these episodes to be really poignant
It's
because
interesting.
currently Victor Davis Hanson is a conservative talking head. I mean, not talking head. He's a conservative writer. He writes books. He writes a lot of articles and stuff, basically discussing conservative theories, and he's a backer of Donald Trump. Gwynne Dyer is a liberal pundit. And if you go to his website, he writes a lot of articles about how Trump is ruining the presidency and the Constitution and
Orange Man bad.
Orange Man bad. Very much in the vein of what we talked about last week from Dan Carlin's Common Sense episode. Very much in the same vein as where Dan was, or Dan is in that episode. So I find it interesting because Dan talks to Victor Davis Hanson and says, how he's one of the historians that most impacts him. And then I remember as you listen to these episodes, later on in the hardcore history episodes, he mentions something about how, he likes reading Victor Davis Hanson no matter what his political beliefs are.
Yeah.
He qualifies it later on. So he distanced himself from that. I found interesting. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about that Victor Davis Hanson talked about. So this was again in November of 2008. He was talking about postmodernism. Okay.
Yep, this is perfect.
Postmodernism is very interesting, and it is the theory that you really don't have objective truth, right? There's only power. There's no, even in history, in life, there's no objective truth. Where the postmodernists believe that it's all made up, and everything is really just about power dynamics.
Yep.
And Victor Davis Hanson said that in 2008, he's like, and we've basically beaten that back, and now we're getting back to the real world, which is hilarious because
which it hasn't got
postmodernism that's woke.
Yep.
For those who don't know, woke ideology is literally based on the postmodernist arguments in universities from the 70s. Like that's what spawned the whole woke movement. And Victor Davis Hanson thought they'd won that battle before it even now. I mean, it didn't even get bad until the 2010s, right? Like that's hilarious that he was talking about how universities had finally won that battle.
Yeah.
Against the postmodernists right before they really, really lost
that battle.
Really lost it. So,
and now they're starting to push back again.
Yes.
I want to say two things on that point. So the first one is like, white man bad. And that basically that's what Victor Davis Hanson said. He's like that's the narrative that's being pushed is white man bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still seeing things like that. So,
right.
Like you're the absolute devil.
Colonizers.
Sure. But then Victor Davis Hanson talks about like, the Native Americans that were here and they didn't have beasts of burden. They didn't use them for
guns, germs, and steel.
Yeah, but this was what he mentioned in the podcast.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. And I think he did mention guns, germs, and steel. Wasn't that Victor Davis Hanson? Or was that Gwynne Dyer? Maybe that was Dyer. I'm sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
Anyway. But and then things really started to improve. With the colonizers. The other thing that he discussed about the colonizers, about the U.S. and immigrants coming here from England, and anyway, was that being able to survive and do what they did during their lifetime and during that time frame was immensely difficult. Carving the roads out and putting the roads down or building bridges or dams or whatever, but we still use them today, even though it's so terrible that they did it and we shouldn't have them. But
right.
Nobody's going back and destroying those things because we still use them and need them today.
Right.
So anyway, I just found that to be, very interesting and enlightening is because he's right. I mean, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people today would survive taking your family in a covered wagon, 1,000 miles west?
Oh man.
Yeah. You've died of dysentery.
Exactly.
Yeah. Back to the Oregon Trail.
Exactly.
One of the things that Victor Davis Hanson talked about that I thought was really accurate is the emphasis on a classic Western education.
Yeah.
And how that's gone. And I think you see that today. I think there's a big problem with that. Like a society needs to have things in common.
But you're saying not having that classical?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Yeah, because we don't have that classic Western, liberal Western education anymore. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Thomas Aquinas, like down the board, like John Locke, the founding fathers. When you throw all that out, because somebody who did something bad that now needs to be thrown out no matter what you end up with is people have there needs to be a common myth for the country to be built on.
Sure.
Nice.
The common myth and the common ideology, right? America, we're not all from the same tribe. Well, Ireland, those people were all Irish. The Germans were mostly German. the frickin' Chinese were a bunch of different kinds of Chinese, and they had giant regions of Chinese. And here, there's no one tribe to unite us. Our ideals and our founding myth is what kept us together as a country.
Yes.
Well, there's one thing I want to bring to that point, George. The foundation of the country was based in religion, right? In Catholicism or Christianity.
Protestantism.
We'll just call it Christianity.
But it was Protestantism.
Sure. But let's call it
Most of the people that came to America weren't Catholic. They were Protestants.
Yeah,
but you're right.
But anyway,
yeah.
And there's some correlation between the extreme empathy that wokeism assumes. I don't know. I don't know if I forget the correct word for terminology for that right now.
Right.
But there's and that is kind of ingrained. So instead of a religion that embodies that kind of caring for people
Sure.
or being self-sacrificial is now being transplanted, since that's so ingrained into our culture, it's now being planted into like wokeism.
Tom Holland made that point on a Rest is History episode a while back. I think it was the one where they were talking about the Protestant Reformation, right? Like, but it's not an uncommon point. Christianity allowed a lot of the amazing things that came in the West. Okay. Christianity is responsible for a lot of the amazing things in the West. But it also, that emphasis on empathy can lead to suicidal empathy.
Sure.
And suicidal empathy can bring down the downfall of the West. And I was just listening to a podcast today. Rogan had Dave Smith and Douglas Murray debate on their podcast. And man, guys, this is good. And it was fascinating. But one of the things that Dave Smith always makes this point, and this is why I have a hard time arguing or listening to him, or I don't agree with him, I guess is the best way to say it, is in his mind, this is off topic, I shouldn't.
No, well, you got to finish the thought now.
In his mind, the innocent deaths caused by the Israelis are not acceptable almost no matter what.
Yeah.
But in the real world, you can't live like that. That is an untenable philosophy. If you are attacked by an enemy that hides behind its own civilians and you don't attack back, then you're gone.
Yeah.
And your people are gone. It's untenable. So while I wish we lived in a world where we could just say we're never going to hurt innocent women and children, it's not possible. And that's that whole idea, like that suicidal empathy that, it doesn't, it's not okay to do that no matter what, but that's just not reality.
Yeah, but they're also hiding behind the women, the
that's
civilians, because they don't think that you'll do that, or it'll just make you look bad, or you don't, or you won't do it.
They care more about Israelis looking bad for killing those innocent women and children than the lives of those innocent women and children.
Yeah.
So if your enemy doesn't value their own citizens' lives as much as you value their citizens' life, you lose.
Yeah.
There's no way to win that unless you're willing to say, okay, well, then that's the cost of this war. And it is. And I don't blame the Israelis at all. And Dave Smith kept going over and over that. And I just wish Douglas Murray would have said, that doesn't matter. I mean, he kind of did, but they started it. At some point, it just comes down to they started it. And there's nothing I can do about it. Japan started it. We bombed them. Okay, we dropped an atom bomb. And I'm sorry, but I think the people who argue in hindsight that was wrong, and I heard Tucker say that a couple times on his podcast, like it was just evil. Like
I don't understand that continuing argument. Yeah, go ahead.
The atomic bombs weren't even the worst that we did. Firebombing Tokyo.
Yes.
Well, and it was way worse.
But Tucker would say that was evil too.
Of course it was.
What's more evil?
Yeah.
Dropping those atomic bombs?
Yeah.
Or invading and having to kill millions of people?
Every man, woman, and child in Japan would have risen up against us. We would have been fighting farmers with pitchforks. They would have been throwing their babies on our bayonets. It would have been absolutely insane. And there's a thing where you can say that America lost her honor in Vietnam, but even though it was for a righteous cause, the way we came out of Japan, if that invasion had happened, would have been one of the greatest stains on our country, even though it would have been by necessity. And we had people at the top who were having a little too much fun bombing things in Europe, right? And we had people there who were being conscientious about, preserving historical sites and stuff like that. But when you have an entire country that is mostly agrarian, that's houses made out of paper and wood, and you're intentionally creating napalm to deal with that situation, I mean, that is a horrific kind of warfare already. That speaks to the kind of mindset that we were in to deal with that, and it's really horrible. I'm happy that Dan always takes so much time in logical insanity to express this, because a lot of people don't know about that stuff. And the kind of narrative that comes out on top of the bomb is that that was the worst thing that's ever happened. But you have to look at what it stopped. And it's the moral decisions being made at that time. Can any of us imagine living with that?
Right.
So to have it criticized, 80 years later, that's tough.
It's nuts.
You better know your history. You better know.
Well, and a lot of people don't. That's funny. Because I have discussed.
Even people who know their history still will make that argument, because it's easier to make that argument now when your grandparents are alive to make sure you were born.
Yeah.
Because if we invaded Japan, a lot of those people making this argument now would never have been born. And how, as the president of the United States, do you look at your own soldiers and say, I'm just going to spend $1 million of your lives,
or 5 million,
when I could literally just end this with 2 bombs? It's not tenable. And it's not like we had dropped nukes before, so we could say, oh, wait, this has these, repercussions. There was no way in hell any president wouldn't have dropped those. There's no way. And to hindsight, Monday morning quarterback, that stuff is it's a suicidal empathy thing. And it happens on the woke left, and it happens on the far right. Like it drives me nuts when Tucker says stuff like that. And I point to that and say, this is the problem with not having any kind of hedging, right? Like, for somebody like Tucker, when he said that on Rogan, and he said it on his podcast before, whereas it was just quantifiably evil and wrong. And he there was no hedging. There was no there's no well, maybe, or probably. And that's kind of what Dave Smith does a lot in this podcast, in the one I was talking about with Rogan, and Douglas Murray calls him on it a lot too, because, like, man, you can't talk in platitudes like that, because in the real world there's context. And I know Martyr Made, they talked about that podcast too. He tries to give context, but then he will purposely troll people and say stuff like, Churchill was one of the primary villains of World War II, which Douglas Murray took exception to today in that podcast. And I agree with Douglas Murray on that's just an asinine argument.
Yeah.
But he's doing that to troll, to get to stir the pot and have fun.
Yeah.
Well, but the problem is, if not everybody understands that. But
it's a serious thing to be trolling about, man.
It is, and that's okay. As long as there's the context. People need that's
the thing is, nowadays, that people have you ever I listen to a lot of podcasts, and like I'll listen to an interview with an actor, you know what I mean? And he'll say like one sentence about like a director or something, and then I'm in my news feed the next day, there's an entire article about that one sentence that this person said. You know what I mean? It's like they will make a meal out of that thing, So we're lifting little cherry-picked details
out of 3-hour podcasts.
Yeah, and then exactly, and then like here's how I'm gonna spin this into what I want to portray it as, and people are only my readers or whatever are gonna just read this, and that's the entire impression they have. I think it's incredibly dangerous, man. I mean,
but bring that back to these ones that we're talking about today.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly, man.
Imagine if these podcasts came out today.
It would be weird, and I think it all starts with
it would make a whole thing out of those.
Yeah.
Right? It would be a whole news cycle.
And that is one thing
You
that
know?
struck me when I was listening to these is that, I mean, one, isn't it great to hear Dan's younger voice? It's like,
Dude, he sounds so different now.
I know.
I wondered if anybody else noticed that.
I know.
I didn't.
He sounds so different.
Yeah, and they were talking about the Afghan war in real time. I was just like, Jesus, we really did go through that, didn't we? That was tough. That was tough. But it definitely, I think that goes back to your original point, George, is that
Mhm.
Dan started this whole thing talking to people of different ideologies, sometimes in quick succession, right? You know what I mean? So he's like, I got this
And
guy on this
reading
side,
them.
and just it's not like, hi, you're here because you support X. It's just like, I just want to hear what you have to say and let's find common ground and all this. And nowadays,
sorry, go ahead.
just really, like nowadays, I think the external world has become so polarized that to do that kind of thing is dangerous for him, and that sucks. But guess what? It's what we're doing here. And I don't care what people think about what we do because I truly believe in this space.
It's a good idea. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is he was just talking to two historians.
Yeah.
And now both of those historians are political pundits.
Oh my gosh. Is that weird?
I mean, that's wild. Right? In 2008 and 2009, these guys were historians.
Yeah.
That followed politics and talked politics even then.
Yeah.
Go look at Gwynne Dyer's website now. It's all politics. Climate change, politics stuff. That's all it is.
Well, look at you, George. I mean, you interviewed Dan Carlin, and now you've just been recently, if I can break this on the air without your permission, you've just been appointed White House executive counsel for the Trump administration. Is that correct?
I wish. I'll kill that shit.
That didn't happen.
That. No, that did not happen.
Scott, you were fucking with me. That's
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Matt. I didn't mean to leave you astray. I was just trolling you, dude.
That's so funny. Okay, so the one note I had with Hanson was how funny that it is that he was so far off about postmodernism being a victory.
Dude, yeah, that's
then
tough.
my other note about the Gwynne Dyer thing is how far off he was about climate change, because like he says climate change is going to be easy. That's easy. We just switched to solar and it's going to be fine.
That's where it all comes from anyway.
That's what he said in 2009. It's hilarious because no, it turns out solar power is not actually going to work for that. It can't scale. It's not sunny enough. There's all kinds of other problems with solar, just like there's no free lunch for any of this.
Yeah.
But he was convinced then that it was going to be easy, just like Hanson was convinced that they won the war against postmodernism.
He also said, though, that, he's like, nuclear, I don't care which way you go.
Right.
I mean, nuclear, sure. I think that's the actually cleanest source of energy we have. The other one I think that's untapped that I think we could really harness would be, and the problem is transmission, but harnessing the tides. Harnessing the power of the tides.
There's no free lunch. There's going to be some problem with that.
Sure.
You guys want to hear something cool?
Yes.
What's up?
Okay, so scientists at Princeton and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory collaborated recently and figured out an age-old problem. I don't know how age-old it is, but it was considered unsolvable, where they learned how to generate electricity from the Earth's rotation.
Ooh,
nice.
So gravity fed electricity.
It's about resistance of the Earth. It's about the Earth's magnetic field passing in a certain direction through a conduit. And so they have basically a tube. I'm going to sum this up very stupidly, but they have basically
dumb it down.
Basically a tube with a conductor in it, and then they point it one way and it doesn't conduct electricity, and then they point it the other way and it does, like, use the Earth's magnetic field.
Though? The first episode we make Matt an official member and he's up here saying lies. the earth is flat, Matt.
Yeah, how could
it possibly
rotate when
rotate?
It's flat?
Yeah, flat things don't rotate,
Oh
Matt.
my God, here we go.
Well, I mean, there's record albums rotate, right?
I would like to apologize right now, now to all of our listeners.
Great point, Matt.
I do troll the flat earthers from time to time, and I brought it up in the conversation.
If you're a flat earther, come to Talking Hardcore. Come to the Hardcore History Discussions Discord channel, to the Talking Hardcore chat, and let's argue about flat Earth because I've never actually
Please
argued
do.
with a flat Earther. And let's fucking go.
Forget that. Why don't we just interview you?
Yeah, well,
about
come on.
flat Earth?
Come talk to us on the Discord channel, and we will have you on to talk about flat
Yes.
Earth. Maybe you can convince me. I am open-minded. I've never been to space.
Hold on.
Okay, I've never circumnavigated the globe.
You know,
I've never been to space.
I want a flat earther who has been to space. Okay, that's where I want to take it.
That's the guy that'll make you believe.
Everything's. Wait a minute.
I got up there. That fucking shit's flat.
Everything.
They're all lies.
Hold on.
We didn't orbit shit. We
I'm
just
here
got
to
up there and
report.
sat still.
Everything is fisheye lens. This
It's all
fisheye
shit.
lens. That.
Bullshit. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, the 3 rings of Narnia.
Let's
Like-
get back. Let's get back to the Dyer episode.
Right.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is he brought up the Blitzkrieg hypothesis of in North America. Do you remember this in the episode? He talked about how there's this idea that most big game species went extinct with the arrival of Native Americans onto the North American continent.
So one thing I started learning about this stuff way back in the day when it is about like anthropology and human, not evolution, but development as societies. And he points this out too. It's a big deal. It's everywhere.
Well,
it's in Guns,
2009, it was a very popular idea.
Right.
For the most part now, some anthropologists still believe it, but for the most part, it is not the widespread belief.
I think
the timelines don't add up.
Yeah, I think
First
you're
of all,
right about
North
that.
Americans, dates of North Americans being in North America, Native Americans being in over here, keeps getting pushed back.
Yeah.
Now there's dates as far back as 20,000 years ago. They found those footprints in New Mexico that are 20,000 years old. Okay, and that was not the fucking first place they made it. Right? There's a site down in the bottom of Peru. The bottom of Peru.
That's crazy.
That's 16,000 years old. So they made it all the way down to the bottom.
Imagine what it took. I love thinking about that.
And most of the sites that we think of would probably be underwater now.
Yeah.
Because they would have went down the coast. They would have stayed near the ocean because of all the food.
Yep.
The ocean is just a food bank. You're not going inland until you're like, well, I'm kind of sick of this lobster and crabs and shit. Let me go see if I can find some more bison.
Yeah.
Like that's otherwise you're staying near the shore. Like I'll kill another whale and eat for like a month. Right? Like you're staying near the coast until the food dries up.
And the salt.
Right? So all those sites are underwater. So we don't have that evidence, but the dates keep getting pushed back. There's also a lot of other things that went extinct around the same time that were not large megafauna, because like a bunch of tree species went extinct, a bunch of plant species went extinct. And you're like, okay, well, why would that have happened? Because of humans coming here. It's not. So a lot of scientists think that mostly what was killing off these large species of megafauna in North America was climate change, because the ice ages were ending.
Yeah.
Okay, the ice age was ending, and you had the earth warming up. So a lot of these megafauna could not adapt to survive. And then maybe the humans came over and finished them off, but they were already on the way out.
Yeah.
Right? Like the mammoth, dude, have you ever heard of some of the animals that were over here in North America that we never talked about as a kid? There was American cheetahs.
So I want to.
There was a short-faced bear,
jaguars,
a short-faced bear.
Horses.
Do you know
horses?
Horses evolved in North America?
So I want to
went
talk about that.
across the Bering Strait over to Europe, and then went extinct in North America, and then were reintroduced to North America with European contact.
So but
they evolved.
That's particularly interesting to me, because long ago when I started like reading out the stuff, it's like, why didn't America develop at the rate of Europe? I kind of came to that independently, you know what I mean? And it's like the same way everyone does. And you start learning, talk about Guns, Germs, and Steel. So that, horses, you know what I mean? So there was an it's a pack animal. It helps you do all these things that help develop civilization. So there was an American horse species. You're absolutely right, George. And it looked very distinctive from the horses we know today. So it had like a spotted hide. It had spots going down the side and like strips. And it had, instead of a hoof, it had 3 toes. Okay. So this is going to be a very proprietary explanation here, but like when I was writing Pax Humana, like I wanted the primitive, like otherworldly horse animals of that world to be like the now extinct American horse. And I looked them up, described them exactly how they were, and had the mechanics of their biological function being they couldn't be shod, they couldn't have horseshoes because they had that tougher three-toed hoof, a foot, play into the story. So like the humans there, after they took over the world, were like developing the evolution of this species.
Well, that's
to be
what
more
they did
aggressive
here.
for warfare. It's incredible. But so
that's
originally,
what we did with horses
when I read that, and it probably was like 10 years ago, at least, like you're saying, George, stuff has updated since now. They were talking about that at that time they believed that it was hunted to extinction by humans. But then later on, you know, that kind of changed where maybe it was not the case. And I just thought about people just like, isn't there all this other stuff to eat? Like, you don't have to just eat the horses. But maybe at that time, it wasn't even conceivably a pack animal to them. So it was just hunted just like everything else. And that would have, it's amazing how one animal, if that's true, I get to this new country, I'm looking for game. I hunt this thing. I like hunting it, you know, for some reason. But we have to look at its movements, like you're chasing down cheetahs or you know, or antelope. Is it easier to hunt and kill? Why would have been hunted out of extinction into extinction? Was it easier to hunt and kill? You know, horses are hard to catch, right? So like, it just this one animal, the absence of it can change the the history of an entire continent. Or just
theory,
its lack thereof. Maybe it was just disease or
there was no
breeding that killed them
the
out.
idea was there
one
was,
animal.
So this is the argument from Guns, Germs, and Steel, right? And Gwynne Dyer talked about this. That right now, and he talks about this in Guns, Germs, and Steel, there's only like 7 good domesticatable pack animals, right? Or domesticatable animals, really, right? And there just happened to not be a good candidate in most of the Americas. They ended up doing it with llamas, right? But you know, there was camels here that went extinct too.
Yep.
There was camels.
Camelops is what they call them.
Yep. There was camels. There was a short-faced bear that was 16 feet tall.
Mammoth, woolly mammoth, dire wolf, mastodons.
Imagine a polar bear, but 16 feet tall.
So when we came across the Bering Strait, I've read that there was large packs of Arctic polar bears that were blocking the way for,
and they think that's why it took longer.
Hundreds of years. Yeah, that took us longer. Yeah, that is insane.
And the other thing to think about the Bering Strait. Well, the other things to think about the Bering Strait is it was not like you would imagine when you call it a strait.
Yeah.
It was 1,000 miles wide.
Yeah.
Okay. People lived.
Right.
People lived
and died in the crossing.
Died for generations during that crossing.
Yes.
It was just another place.
Oh,
it wasn't
are awesome.
A bridge. Yeah, it was just it wasn't a bridge to them, right? Yeah. Until it went away, and you're like, well, this is different. But they probably never even noticed that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I love the history of North America and South America and all that, and I hope this is the thing that's going to be really fun. Is the ancient DNA, as they can get more Native American DNA.
Yeah.
There's a problem with Native Americans not liking to let their ancient samples be used for DNA purposes, and even
that's probably a good
population
reason for that,
samples.
23andMe just went out of business, and all that stuff is being scooped up by whoever, and they're going to have the access to all your biological records. It's so weird,
right? But also, they don't trust the scientists in the labs because that stuff's been used for negative purposes before.
Yes, to disprove their claims on their own land.
Right. So the idea is, though, the more, and I read a book about this from like 2019, so it's already out of date. But like that, what they're able to do with the ancient DNA and even the modern DNA and their population models and all that stuff is they're literally pushing back the dates. And I believe in an ArchaeoEd podcast, I believe that he mentioned one of the archaeologists or anthropologists was talking about how now they think it's like 20 to 50,000 years people have been in the Americas. So probably about the same time as Australia.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit, right? Like, we thought it was until until like 30 years ago, they thought it was 12,000 years tops.
Yeah.
And then like 100 years ago, they thought it was 6,000 years.
Yeah.
That's tops, right? And instead, whole centuries and millennia went through here of the people living just like our every ancestors, all tribal people lived everywhere. And there was civilizations and empires rising and falling over and over again. Because that's the story of human history. It's just we don't have a written record of it.
We have stories, as we always do, and I think that the oral history of our people is the most important thing to preserve. I think that a lot of that is preserved in First Nation people. I'm fortunate enough to work with 3 tribes up here, and I'm just absolutely fascinated and honored by like anything they share with me. You know what I mean? It does. The deeper you go back, the more it gets into mythology, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. But all mythology has a little truth in it. That's why it's passed down. You know, that's why.
Least it has usefulness.
It has usefulness in your practical society. Yeah, and it gets back to what you're saying, George, about a shared mythos.
Yeah.
Just real quick, we're going to jump way back here, but I'm totally willing to move forward after this. I thought of something cool to say. Is that I was listening to Yuval Noah Harari on Lex Friedman like several months ago. And he said something that I will never forget. He said that large-scale societies require a certain amount of fiction to maintain. And I think that's absolutely true. I think that works from develop and Dyer talks about this in the episode there where he's talking about
I was about to bring this up.
Right. So early humans, there was no hierarchy, right? Everyone's kind of free and they had their own authority.
Literally, I was just looking at my notes because this is the main point we need to talk about.
And then we got into agriculture and structure, you know what I mean? And it wasn't pretty. Like you had to subject yourself to someone to authority that was not directly connected to your family, your tribe, or your clan. And there had to be substitutes in the new government for this connection in titles, roles, language, and religion.
Well, that's true. So he's talking about how political process evolved. When Dyer was talking about this, how political process evolved to get us closer back to the innate, natural, egalitarian aspects of hunter-gatherers. Because from all the evidence we have, hunter-gatherer tribes were fairly egalitarian. I think he's probably going a little too far by saying nobody was in charge, because there were respected elders in a lot of tribes where they were more in charge and the young people were contained.
We also had the chief.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, there was some hierarchy.
There was structure. There was some hierarchy, but it was much more egalitarian.
Yeah.
And this goes back to another, well, we'll get to that. But the idea, because Dan asked him, like, well, is it that Western democracies, Western cultures are unique? And Dyer, made the argument that we just evolved the technologies first that allowed us to get closer to egalitarianism, which is the natural human state, which I had never heard that argument before.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And it's a fascinating take. I'm not sure if he's right or not.
Yeah.
But man, is that interesting.
Yeah.
You know, the printing press. We evolved a lot of things in Western culture that allowed us to get more egalitarian. And it's more than that too, though, right? It's also, we evolved the process, which that it wasn't just the technology, it was also the process, because you need a egalitarianism, you need individual liberty, right, to make that work.
Yeah.
And that only evolved in certain places, right? And you needed a culture for that. So you had to evolve the technology, and you had to involve the culture to have competent egalitarian principles that were possible to practice. Because look at, like, you had the ancient Greeks, right? Like, they got too much democracy too fast, some of them in Athens, and they weren't able to sustain it, right? And that's possible that could happen to us too, right? Like, the British have been slowly getting more free until like the last 100 years, slowly getting more free from the king, and it was through a natural evolution of that system, right? But like, I don't think there's any way to say that would happen everywhere, because China was civilized for a long time, but because they didn't develop a printing press, maybe, is what Dyer would say, I think. And I don't know. It was I need to re-listen to that again, but that was a fascinating take that I had never thought of before.
Well, and like he said, every society has to have a class, has to have a class system. Like, I mean, that's basically what the crux is to society. Is you have people that are going to make things, people that are going to grow things. I mean, that's just what he said. That's the crux of society. Is you have to have there's just like a class system, basically.
Well, division of labor.
Okay, but still, you're still going to have people on top that aren't laboring. You're still going to have a class that isn't laboring.
It's working together for a common goal, and the people who aren't laboring better be doing something functional for that goal.
Sure.
Well, I mean, maybe. But there was lots of societies that lasted a long time where the rulers probably didn't do anything but fight.
That's correct.
To keep themselves
and that's
in charge.
why we have this sense of royalty nowadays as being unnecessary and ridiculous. But I mean, some kings were the so when you step it back from kings. In fact, I'm going to go further back from this. I'm going to pull a Daryl Cooper and start from the dawn of time. So, like, I heard an anthropologist talking about the development of societies, and it's possible that the first societies developed around elephant carcasses, because the first time that we humans, as animals, basically at that time, had an excess of resources, being food, that we were able to share and coordinate on the acquisition of. Like, here, you can have some of this. I'm done with this. Here's how you cut this part of it. Here's how you eat this part of it. And you fast forward that to tribes, which is where, okay, yeah, you have a role in the tribe, but your role is acknowledged in a tribal ceremony or daily life. And then you have people who are, not contributing the same as you, but receive the same benefit because you are working towards that common goal at a very close level. And so it's always very apparent to you. Then you get into the agricultural age and things become much more separated. You got to, basically all that's about is managing resources. So at the top you have an administrator, right? You know what I mean? And that's hard to justify. It's like, I am picking the wheat. You're counting the wheat. Like that's tough. You know what I mean? Like, you live in a better house than me. I don't get it. So all that kind of stuff breaks down into how much worth you get from it.
One thing that's interesting there, Matt, is, so the idea there is part of the reason civilization evolved is because we had to deal with the logistics of killing a large animal that you couldn't just put in a refrigerator. Is kind of what you're saying, and that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. One of the books that I read a while ago that I thought was awesome was called The Social Leap. And the author in that book puts forth the hypothesis that humans evolved to live in groups in societies for self-defense, because when the trees started to go away in the savannah and it turned into grasslands, there were still all these big cats, and we no longer could hide in the trees. Our ancient ancestors, who were only about this tall and very much like monkeys, could no longer live in the trees because the trees were all going away. So we had to evolve a way to fight off big cats. Well, one 4 foot or 2 foot tall monkey fighting off a lion doesn't work. But if all of those humans or all of those monkey proto-humans throw rocks at a lion, that'll drive it away or even kill it.
Sure. Right.
Which the hypothesis, the argument he makes there, which he points out that like humans are just born throwing. Like a little kid just throws.
Yeah.
Without even knowing why or what, they just grab shit and throw it. And his argument is that is something that is born into us so deep that it is before we were even walking upright, right? We learned to throw. And then because then we had to, the only way we could survive is to have a bunch of us living together for self-defense. We had to evolve bigger brains to deal with the social aspects of living together, because that was more complicated than the self-defense. The self-defense wasn't the hard part. It was learning to understand what the other monkeys were doing and how that impacted you.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of our closest relatives are also very smart primates, right? Because like they live in groups where there's a lot of social dynamics.
Sure.
And that caused us to evolve to be smarter, because social dynamics are more complicated to understand.
It absolutely is, yeah.
Than natural dynamics.
Yep.
Like the tiger wants to eat me, that's easy to understand, right? But like, why is this bitch over there side-eyeing me? Why is that guy mad at me? Think about how much harder that is to understand than that thing looks like me, like I'm food.
Yeah. Right.
That's much easier.
If I'm working alone, I don't care what you think about me. But if I need your help, that's emotional intelligence.
Right. Exactly. And it is something that most animals don't have. Right. But we evolved that, and that caused our brains to get bigger and bigger, is the theory.
Yeah.
And if anybody has a chance, read The Social Leap. Man, is that a fascinating theory.
Let's do it. Yeah.
It's so good. I think it's William von Hinkle, if I remember the name right. Is fascinating. I've told you to read that book a few times. It's on Audible, so you can listen to it. But it helps inform the way I think about humans at all. And then he talked a little bit, Gwynne Dyer, we'll get back to the podcast. He talked another thing. He talked about empire and
how Americans don't want empire.
Thank you. Yeah. That's what I was trying to think of the right way to say that. But Americans don't want empire, right? So what I thought about that, because he said, America is not really an empire, which is the way I always thought about that too, until a recent podcast, and I've mentioned it to you guys, a recent podcast that I listened to where he talked about, if America's not an empire, how come we're not 13 colonies, right? Like, how come we're not 13 states all on the West Coast? We conquered all that shit. We conquered it. But the difference is most empires, when they conquer, they don't incorporate that into themselves. Like the Roman citizens had to fight with the Italian citizens. They fought a whole war to try to keep them from becoming Roman citizens. Like the idea here was we were spreading out and making more and more of this territory the same part of the thing. And that's kind of what America does. Like, what did we do when we won World War II? We tried to make Germany and Japan more like us.
Yeah, so I was going to say, do we do it differently nowadays? I mean, that was warfare in self-defense. But I would say that America is an empire of trade. We absolutely are. And we use our Navy to patrol the oceans to protect our trade and world trade. That was a deal after the Second World War. Where, rising tide lifts all boats, pun intended.
Sure.
And so that is absolutely, and then we use, organizations like, I'm going to bring it back to contemporary politics, the USAID, to influence foreign policy, foreign cultures to suit our policies. And that shifts based on whatever administration is in place. You know what I mean?
But empires dominate, right? Like that's the point of an empire.
That's our traditional,
right?
So that's our traditional association with the word empire is the Romans, is American colonization through guns.
The Mongols.
You don't have to do that. You can influence people. You can make them like you, make them need you. Well, we do that through trade and we do that through culture.
So the thought I had when I was listening to this podcast is, it's not that Americans don't have the will to spread out like an empire. What they don't have is the will to dominate. Like, we could have stayed in Afghanistan forever. We could afford to. The idea that it was bankrupting us is bullshit. We could easily have stayed in Iraq and Afghanistan forever. But the American people did not want to.
Yeah.
They don't have the will. Britain would have stayed there for a long time. Look at how long they were in India.
Yeah, but that's not in our ethos.
That's my point. That's my point.
It's not that we don't give a shit. We just don't.
We don't have the will to dominate, because that's what it would have taken to really switch Afghanistan. Well, no. Think about it,
what's
right?
funny is that,
but 1 second, Matt. 1 second.
Yeah,
think about Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
And that whole culture. If you were really going to change that, The reason Russia wasn't able to and Britain wasn't able to is because they couldn't win that guerrilla war.
Yeah.
Well, we did. That wasn't the part for us. We had the technology that would let us defeat those guerrillas. We have drones. We had such a technology advantage that we didn't leave because we were afraid or we were sick of them killing us. We left because we were sick of it. But if we actually had the will to dominate them and enforce them to accept our culture, it would have been better for the people in Afghanistan.
Yes.
It would have been better use of the lives that we wasted to take Afghanistan, and that whole region would be better served. And there would be way less evil shit happening to innocent people. But we don't have the will to that. And that says something good about Americans.
Yes, that was my point. Yeah.
I agree. It does. Yeah. That we never get credit for that. We never get credit
I think you're
for
right,
not having the will to dominate.
I want to point that out right now, while it's still in my mind to be articulated. You know what's special about America is it's as you said, George. Countries, large scale societies require a certain level of fiction to maintain. They require a common bonding myth, and America is this conglomerate of disparate cultures and peoples, and we come together for a better life, and it really does work. And that makes us better. It's why we're so successful. It doesn't make us we're not lording it over people.
Culture.
It makes us better, and that's why people come here. It's still working.
Yes.
And the fact that we have something legitimately better, and we're not just dominating like that.
Yes. We have the army and the military to just say, "Fuck all of you. We're in charge."
Yeah.
We literally could do that still.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if we could.
Oh, fuck yeah, we could.
No, hold on.
Yeah, I think Scott's about to be right.
No, hold on. There's too many nuclear weapons for us to be able to even pull that off.
But mutually assured destruction still holds.
Sure.
None of these big countries could drop a nuke on us because we have enough that we could nuke them, but we have enough other military that we could conquer everything. And the point is, not just that, Scott, is we have the economic power to bankrupt everybody. And that's really what these tariffs that are happening in America are about.
Off topic.
No, it's not. This is exactly on topic for what Gwynne Dyer was talking about and all of that, right? Like Trump with these tariffs, what he's arguing is we keep the world safe.
Yeah.
Our very presence keeps the world safe, and the whole world runs because of our markets. And he's kind of right. And he's saying, so we spend all this money and we do all of these things, and you guys just leech off of us. That's his argument. I'm not sure that's right, but that's his argument. And he's like, so if we're going to protect the whole world, which is what we do, literally, if our Navy wasn't what it is, all the world trade stops, okay? International trade stops completely and goes back to what it was before, when there's times of pirating and China would be doing all kinds of worse shit than they are now. If our Navy wasn't so robust and strong, and our satellite systems and all of our technology, the whole world economy stops. It does.
It does.
It stops.
Yeah.
And so why the fuck are we paying for all this shit? That's the argument. And so I'm not saying he's right.
It comes back to us.
But
everything we're doing comes back to us.
It does.
It benefits
Matt,
us.
The average American, 50% of Americans are in a shit ton of debt. Like there's all kinds of problems here. That's homelessness.
The exterior
debt,
system
drugs.
is in place, but the interior system where we're outsourcing stuff and not investing in our own people is a different system.
Yeah. Are we sacrificing the good of American citizens for the benefit of others without getting anything back?
The external effort should absolutely reap the rewards of the internal benefit. It's just not because there's people on the inside taking advantage of all that wealth.
Right. Well, and there's people on the outside taking advantage of all that wealth too.
Yeah,
right?
there are, and you know what? Like,
and that's okay. Like, but the point is, if Trump's idea is, let's rebalance this. And I think
check it out.
I think that's the whole idea behind I think that's the whole idea behind these tariffs. Is like he's trying to reset up a new Bretton Woods. Okay, like the deal at the end of World War II, which was okay. We've got nukes. We've got this Navy. You use the dollar. We'll keep Russia at bay, and we'll keep the oceans from pirates. Right? That was the deal. Well, now it's, we keep everything running. All of your markets depend on us. All of it. Everything depends on the American economy, okay? And the American Navy and the American satellites and all of that shit. Well, it's time that we readjust then, because it needs to benefit Americans more than it has been. And that's partly to do with the bad actors in America. And Trump's trying to find those people too. And I don't know if he's going to be successful, but I do think that's the plan. I don't know if he's right, but that's the plan, that the way I see it.
It's
so
a
the
hard
idea that
reset.
Tariffs are bad, it's a hard
Yeah.
thing to pull off.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right? And it could easily go sideways.
And there's the part where he's pulling it back to where he's like, that's what could happen. Now let's talk.
Right. Well, because it gave him all the leverage.
Yeah.
And that's why he puts forward this asinine tariff percentage formula. Okay. It doesn't make any sense if you're actually doing the math.
But person
because
to person, it does.
The way they came up with the tariff formula was they actually took the amount of the trade deficit. But that doesn't make sense. That's an asinine way to come up with the tariff formula.
I know.
But what it is good is if you're trying to have a ridiculously high number to start negotiating.
Sure.
And what is Trump if not a negotiator? So he's like, it's the same thing as like, well, if I said to you, I want to buy your house, and you're like, well, I don't really want to sell. I'm like, well, give me a number. So you throw out a high number. It's starting of a negotiation. That ridiculous trade formula and all those 90% tariffs and all that shit, all that is like, fuck with me. This is what we're going to do. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to start really high, and he doesn't care, which is unique for a politician. He does not care that it makes him look stupid right now.
Sure.
He doesn't care that those trade numbers make him look stupid right now.
Yeah.
Because the idea is, once I get the deals, I'll look smart.
Sure.
Most politicians don't have the balls
care about the moment, right?
To look stupid.
Yeah. Yes.
They're too afraid.
Yeah.
And Trump's like, they're going to say negative shit about me anyway. They're going to say I'm bad anyway. They're going to call me a racist anyway. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the leverage to get what's right for America.
I love that. If that's
fair.
What's actually
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's going to be successful, but that's the way it looks like.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, what's funny is over the weekend after the stock market took a sizable hit on Friday, and I take to Reddit from time to time.
Yeah.
And it's, people were like, oh, are you happy yet? Are you happy yet? Like, is this what you voted for? Right. Like, egg prices still aren't down. Look at crude oil right now, below $60 a barrel. Right. It's absolutely insane.
Right.
Which is funny because, starting up the Keystone pipeline will have that effect.
Right.
It forces people to come back to the table and say, okay, fine, we can cut prices again.
Right.
Or, we don't have to. Anyway, back to your point, George. I don't want to expand too much because I've been doing some research into China and what.
And that's what this really comes down to.
Sure.
Is Trump is putting maximum pressure on China. And China was trying to see if the rest of the world would back with them.
Yeah.
And they basically all told China to fuck off.
Yeah.
And so now China is going to be fucked.
Well,
and it's about time somebody in America said, what's best for China is not best for us.
Well,
most politicians are in Chinese pockets, so they can't do that.
We're so ingrained with that country that extricating ourselves from it will be an extremely long and arduous process.
It's a hard divorce.
What's funny is what do we trade? What does China buy from us?
Oh God,
very little.
Very little. I mean, the soybeans, that's number one. I think that'd be our number one export to China.
They are a bunch of soy boys.
Yeah. So I think number two would be like maybe manufacturing goods, stuff like that. But the problem is China has artificially inflated their currency for the past, 20 years.
Yes.
Almost 30 years now. So basically the yuan is 7 yuan is worth $1.
And
So they've artificially inflated their own currency.
Mm-hmm.
They're already starting to shut down factories. I don't know if
they've robbed from Peter to pay Paul.
I
subsidized.
I have the numbers on this really quick if you want me to augment your point here. In 2024, China was the third largest destination for U.S. exports, with total shipments valued at approximately $143.5 billion. Key exports included $15.3 billion in electronics, notably integrated circuits, $14.7 billion in oil, gas, and coal, and $12.8 billion in soybeans, making China the leading market for U.S. soybean exports. Other significant
Tofu.
U.S. exports to China consist of aircraft, pharmaceutical products, and vehicles.
Right.
Yeah.
And how much do we import of Chinese goods?
I think it's like 300 or 400 billion. All right, no, that's the deficit. It's probably like 500 billion.
It's a lot. And it's all junk.
Well,
Not all junk,
it's
but
not
a lot of junk.
A lot of it's not well made. We
Read-
all know that.
Read The End of the World is Just a Beginning by Peter Zehan, and I think you're going to see it helps inform what's happening now, because I think he's wrong, because the underlying premise of that book is what happens because of Trumpism and nationalism when America pulls back. But I think what that book gets right is what would happen if America did it, which is why Trump's got all this leverage.
Yeah.
Because like if we pulled back, we'd be fine.
Well, the
rest of the world would literally be fucked.
They also have an ace in the hole too.
But we would be fine. If we pulled back from the world, do you want to know why we'd be fine?
Hold on.
Mexico and Canada.
Yep, but they also hold their. I think China's one of the largest holder of U.S. bonds.
Yeah,
So
fuck 'em.
if they can't, the problem.
Come get it.
But back to this.
That's what I say. If we pull back from the world and everything goes to fuck, come get it. What are you going to do? Go to war with us for that? Good luck.
Well, see, that's the
Pound
thing.
sand.
Hold on.
That's just paper bullshit.
That's the thing I wanted to get back
Who
to.
do they go to?
So
who do they complain to? They go to collector. They're gonna hire a collection agency to collect on us.
So hold on.
There's no making us pay if we decide we don't want to.
Well, so anyway, what would happen is they decide to cash in their bonds. They'd have to cash them in for cash.
Yeah, fuck 'em.
Okay, but then
We print as much as we want.
but this is the other side of the coin is if they cashed all those bonds in, yes, it would affect our market, but at the same time, it would show how overvalued their currency is. So then the yuan would crash.
Right, but exactly. But the point of that, what I was saying with that book though, is the idea is if America actually pulled back, Peter Zehan at least makes the case that like we'd be one of the few countries that would actually be absolutely fine. We have all these navigable rivers. We have all this natural resources in America and Canada, and we have a bunch of labor in Mexico. Nothing bad's going to happen to us.
Well,
but a lot of these countries don't even have enough of land to make all the food their people eat. That's his argument. Like, okay, what happens to China? All of a sudden, people start starving again because they don't even have enough growing areas, right? Like they won't be able to get. And if that's because, remember, we're not policing the oceans then. So pirates start stealing food.
One more thing. You're talking about labor forces and, Canada and Mexico or whatever. We probably won't even need those in the next 5 years.
Right. That's also possible. But the point is, like, that's why we have all this leverage. And that's why Trump can basically tell these countries, you better stop fucking with us. Because, like, we'd still be okay. And they would be screwed. So then you better understand
here too.
Yes. Oh yes. It would not be painless.
Yeah. There'd be.
But we would have the least amount of pain out of all these countries.
Sure. I'll go with you on that one.
That was his argument, and I think he's right.
But then the one thing that you're not bringing up is what's going to stop a power hungry entity if we did pull back, what's going to stop a power hungry entity from taking over whatever they wanted?
Because nobody else has the power to do it. And we would still have enough to keep them out of North and South America. So nobody would be able to do it for the world. So the idea is we would still patrol North and South America and run all this whole freaking continent and the southern continent and just like have this sphere of influence. And then nobody else would actually have the ability to do that same thing for the rest of the world.
You need oil because you need to fuel
Yeah, but there's a shit ton of that in Canada. Right. There's a shit ton of that in America.
I'm just saying.
Right.
You need to fuel all those ships that are patrolling the oceans to protect your trade.
Well, a lot of those ships are nuclear.
They're changing to nuclear, so that's a key point to look for. People who are really investing in that, and then where like China is developing partnerships with people who can trade for oil. You know what I mean? Because like that, you have to look at from the top down of America. How do we
just go start stealing their ships?
Well, and
we just go start pirating. That's what everybody used to do. That's what Britain did. They were pirates. France was pirates. They would steal the ship from their enemies all the time.
What's not being talked about, and what is like a closely held secret. It's not even, it's a completely open secret. The U.S. is actually sitting on a ton of oil reserves. And I'm not talking about pumped oil reserves. I'm talking about
in the ground.
in the ground.
Yeah.
We're not tapping shale oil. We're not tapping any kind of oil.
Lots of it.
And there's tons. They just found a ton more in Texas.
I'm pretty sure we have the most oil. I'm pretty sure we have the most oil reserves in the world. And we just don't. Well, and part of the problem is our refineries don't produce the type of oil that we can't refine the type of oil that we have. So we have to build new refineries. But it's actually cheaper for us to sell this oil to other places and then buy back the other oil. We make more money doing that instead of refining our own oil.
Right.
Well, we'd build those refineries real quick if we had to.
Sure. But what we do with our oil now is we send it to Japan for refining, and then they send it back here.
Well, no, because so different oils are good for different things. And when you're fracking oil, it's a different kind of oil, and it's actually more expensive. Like once you refine it, it's actually more expensive. So we sell more expensive oil and buy back cheaper oil that works with our refineries, right? So it actually is a good deal for us, but we could easily change that. Like that's not a big deal to build some new refineries. Was that 4 years, 5 years? And if shit was really important, we get it done in 6 months.
Yeah.
Like we have all these ideas that things take all this time. Well, once things get important, then they stop taking time.
Sure.
Like look at World War II. How fast did they shift everything over and start building tanks and bombers very quickly?
That's one of the issues that Trump's trying to tackle as well is the lack of manufacturing.
You can't have critical.
That's what I was going to say. Like, how much is
assets.
America actually investing in making itself independent nowadays?
Well, like we can't have all our antibiotics made in China.
Yeah, man.
That's a terrible idea.
Well, most of our
ammo should not be made.
Well, most
guys went to prison for that. Those guys from that movie War Dogs. You know that? You ever see that movie?
Well, they screwed up on a different thing. They relabeled that
repackaged
ammunition.
Chinese ammunition and
wow, I never watched that.
No, you should read the book and you should listen to interviews with the guy who wasn't the dick in that situation about what happened. So there were American.
I'm gonna Google that. The non-dick from War Dogs.
Yeah, he's really cool. So, like, very briefly, there was a guy who started doing contracting for the United States government, weapons deals, whatever they need, and then he brought on his buddy. They got this huge deal where we were trying to get out of Afghanistan. So it's a little apropos to this episode. We're trying to get out of Afghanistan, so we were funding the Afghan army, right? We were supplying like 250,000 soldiers with rifles and ammunition and body armor and all this kind of stuff. And a contract went out for like millions of rounds, 1 million rounds of AK-47 ammunition. Okay, so they're like, okay, we're going to start sourcing this from everywhere. They found a large portion of it in an Eastern European country, but it had been it was Chinese boxed ammunition, and it had the aluminum casings on it too, so it wasn't even that great. Some of it was not in good condition, but there was an arms embargo at the time, and probably still is against moving around against purchasing ammunition or arms from China. Excuse me. So they couldn't just do that. So instead of telling the United States government, look, we're just going to this stuff was like moved through 2 sources. Can we just buy it from them and give it to you? We're not buying it directly from China. They made a deal with some people on site, some locals, to repackage all this ammunition in cardboard boxes. And then they just tried to pass it off as like, hey, this is good ammo. So they never, the guy who was the dick in that situation, he didn't pay the guy who put the ammo in the boxes for like 120 grand. And that guy ratted them out to the FBI. Nice. And that guy later turned up dead on the side of the road, having been run over by his own car. So that seems
unlikely.
Yeah, those damn Chrysler.
That's a hell of a way to commit suicide. I mean, that's a hell of a way. Like, I'm gonna get my car to run me over.
Well, you know that. All right, this is way off topic.
We got to stop.
I have to say
off
this
topic.
now.
Okay.
You remember the guy that played Chekhov in the new Star Trek movie?
Yeah.
That's how he died.
I'll tell you exactly what happened with Anton Yeltsin. Okay, that guy's a great actor. Okay, so he had at the time newer model Jeep Pioneer, And
Matt
it had
was
an
there.
issue where when you put it in the park, it would sometimes not catch and go into neutral. Okay, so he lived in a townhouse, and it had kind of like a sloping driveway down towards his gate. He drove through the gate, got out, shut, the gate closed behind him, and then he went to check his mail, and the car shifted into neutral and rolled backward and pinned him against the gate, and he suffocated.
I thought you guys knew better than to trust these kind of things anymore. Like maybe he knew too much. Maybe he was on the Epstein list.
Russia.
Maybe he was on the Epstein list.
What are you doing?
Maybe
a horrible
Mossad
tragedy.
took him out.
I love that dude. That was very sad. Come on.
I mean, it is sad, but I'm just saying, you guys just go ahead and believe everything you read in the papers.
From Mother Russia.
His car ran him over. That seems unlikely.
He was KGB plant.
George, as I'm now a new member of the actual hosting crew, does Jeep sponsor this podcast?
I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying. You guys are you just believe all the big Ford people pushing these lies to conspire against the Jeep.
Well,
that's all I'm saying. That's a traditional American company.
The lawsuits
won
coming
World War II on the back of these Jeeps, guys.
I can already smell the lawsuit coming in from
throw
Stellantis.
Jeep under the bus like that. There,
Stellantis is coming for us
for
this one.
I have something fun that I thought of to say. If we're still going to do conspiracy corner, so
conspiracy corner. Is how we're gonna. Pause. I'm gonna set it up. So when we remember, which is not every episode, we are going to try to end these episodes with a fun conspiracy theory, which I guess we're not counting Matt's crazy conspiracy theory about this guy getting killed by his own car. We're going to go with something else today. Matt, go ahead. You want to start us off? Conspiracy corner.
The guy who shot Trump in the face had at least some help from the federal government.
It's possible.
I wouldn't doubt that.
So here's the problem, and this is where I try to talk to my cousin. He's pretty deep into a lot of these things. And you shouldn't attribute intention where incompetence would just as equally apply. Okay? So it could just be that the people that were guarding him were incompetent. Or it could be that he had some kind of help. I don't know. But it wouldn't shock me if it was just they didn't really like Trump. They gave him the E crew. Right, and maybe he gets killed, and
that's
they're
what
like,
I mean by
at
least some help, like not like putting the gun in his hand, but setting up the circumstances under which this occurred, was able to occur.
Kind of like, well, people hate him. We get everybody calling him Hitler, and then we give him the worst security we
I want
to
focus on something you just said, because right after this happened, an appropriate amount of time after it happened, where things had settled down, some real information was coming out, and it was able to actually be reported on by responsible individuals. Mike Baker, former CIA agent, been on Rogan a bunch of times now, hosts the President's Daily Brief short form news podcast, which I love and listen to every day. And he also does a longer form one on Saturdays where he has a guest. Okay. So after the Trump assassination attempt, the first one, he had on a guy who was former head of security for the Republican National Convention. I forget his exact CV, but he's a serious dude. And he, during the course of that conversation, like he said, okay, look, there's this thing the CIA calls turning up the volume. It's when you can't get to someone personally, you make society so crazy that they do it for you.
Right.
Well, there was a number of them.
So you spend 10 years calling Trump Hitler and how he's going to take over America.
Using
and
the
we're never gonna
American
have another election.
Media.
Using the propaganda tools we honed in other countries on our own citizens.
Yes.
To the point where my uncle, who's just a normal guy, red-blooded American, was in the UAW for 30 years or whatever it was, 35 years, was disappointed that the assassin missed. And I said, it probably would have ended up in a war then. He goes, well, you got to get it over with eventually.
Jesus.
And I thought, man, I think you just don't understand how bad civil wars are then. And the kind of awful shit that would have happened if that guy was successful. And, there's a chance that me and you would have been shooting at each other. You got to think about this shit. But that's to the point. You watched your regular news. This guy, he watched his regular news for 30 years. He thought he could trust it and still does. And they've been lying about Trump for that long, to the point where there was a lot of Americans
to the point where now
that wish
when, like,
that guy was successful.
he gets back in office and he's actually
Mhm.
doing stuff that may be beneficial for the country, they're able to easily point and say, this is a dictator. So, like,
Yep.
there's a lot of stuff with the actual assassination, dude, that was weird. Like, first of all,
Mhm.
flying a drone around. Like, you can't just fly a drone around Joe
Uh-uh.
Biden. You can't do it. It's shut down
Uh-uh.
airspace. It's restricted airspace.
Your
There
drone quits working.
yeah. And there
It
was
just
the
quits working.
yeah, there was
It's
the
not
actual
like they're going to come get you and say stop it.
yeah.
Your literally drone won't work.
Yeah.
It's dead
Um,
airspace.
There was the fact that the
He
Secret
had a
Service
rangefinder.
allowed him to operate like this on site for so long with people pointing out there's a dude with a
Uh-huh.
gun on the roof.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I understand they have their procedures and they're not just going to shoot somebody,
And
okay?
we couldn't have somebody on that roof because it was too steep.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Tim Dillon did a great episode about this, man. He was
Right.
just like,
God.
the head of the Secret Service had to step down. She's the one who took the hit. This is her job. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
And
yeah.
it could be that.
5-degree slope.
But again,
yeah.
It's too slope. Too
I
much.
also-
too much of a slope.
I also just think it's possible, like you said, Matt, like they were hoping that they had enough incompetent people there that it would be successful. They didn't even have like a regular briefing between the police and the Secret Service to the point where the police and the Secret Service weren't on the same radio frequency.
Yeah.
So the police couldn't talk to the Secret Service. Like, what?
Yeah,
Like that's insane. And that's not standard procedure. So
8 shots.
Yeah,
He fired 8 shots before they took him down. 8 shots. 8 shots.
All looks nuts. It all looks nuts. But also, not everything's a conspiracy.
Not everything is, but this is
Sometimes
Conspiracy
your Jeep
Corner,
just
so we're
runs you
trying to do
over.
our best.
Sometimes your car just kills you. Sometimes you shoot yourself with your gun and it lands 15 feet away.
Sometimes
Shit happens.
Sometimes the guy
Jeffrey
that,
Epstein hangs himself.
Sometimes the guy that ratted you out to the FBI just ends up dead. You know.
Yeah.
Sometimes you hang yourself by
Yeah.
when the cameras just happen to stop working.
Oh, and you were supposed to have a cellmate too.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
see, this is the thing though, right? And this is a true warning. I like to make jokes about conspiracy. That's the whole fun about Conspiracy Corner. Okay, this is fun. Don't take it too seriously. I know that once there are real conspiracies and you realize that, it becomes easier to believe that more and more things are conspiracies. But also, it is important to remember that not everything is a conspiracy. Michelle Obama is probably a chick.
Jesus.
Probably. It's very likely that she is not a dude.
You had to drop that one.
No, I'm serious though. Like, I had a whole argument with my cousin today via text. He is convinced that Michelle Obama's a dude. And he's convinced that COVID was leaked on purpose. And I said, well, maybe.
Ooh.
But I said
That's
maybe.
two completely different things. Yeah.
But the problem is, like, to him,
I think your point is,
everything's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so maybe COVID was leaked on purpose.
Yeah.
Maybe Michelle Obama's a dude.
Nah.
But you don't have any evidence.
Yeah.
No.
And the lack of evidence is not evidence. And I saw this picture online. Well, maybe that was doctored. I doubt she's wearing dresses that lets her dick just flop around. If she is a dude, she's not stupid. So that seems unlikely.
No,
I'm sorry, but it seems unlikely.
The best one was when Jon Stewart was on like the late night show or something with
Right.
Stephen Colbert. I think it was
It's
Stephen
like
Colbert.
the Wuhan lab.
Oh, we think
COVID lab?
we think a bat mated with a walrus, and then we got the COVID virus. He's
Right.
like, how about the sign on the building that says
COVID, the place that they have all the. But see,
Coronavirus
but what I was
Research
arguing
Institute
with
of
my cousin
Wuhan.
my cousin is convinced that was released intentionally to sabotage Trump.
Wow.
Okay, and what I would argue, and this
That's
is what
a
I told him.
huge. Yeah.
Here's the thing: I said you don't have any proof of that. He goes, well, look at all the math. Like the timing's just too. It's a once in 100-year virus, and it happens right here. I said, well, I believe that there's good evidence that it leaked from the lab, but what you don't have, and this is important, is evidence that it was actually released on purpose. It could easily be that a bunch of people took advantage of a crisis because that's what politicians do, and that's what everybody does. So, like, the point is, like, we still need evidence. Conspiracies happen. Yes, not everything's a conspiracy, and we need evidence.
Well, there's a lot of people.
Scott's uncle is really his dad, and that's because we have photographic evidence.
Oh my God, great uncle! First of all,
Yeah, that's
Great
really
uncle.
kinky.
that's not.
Your mom's
even-
got a taste for the old.
It's great uncle. First of all,
He's really cool. He's so cool.
not
He's
my
great.
dad.
He looks like your dad.
I never even met the guy.
That's because your mom didn't want to bring him around because it was awkward. Because if you brought you around and your dad was like, "Wait a minute, watch this guy look just like my uncle," and then your mom would look all guilty, and so maybe your mom was smart. One night they were just,
I don't want to hear it.
hanging out at a family reunion.
That's enough.
And you saw that guy. He obviously looked really smooth. He obviously looked
What's-
like a charmer.
What's
And
really,
he talked his way.
it's really funny is the whole family. Like when I used to come in when I was younger, they'd be like, "Oh, it's Sal Mineo,"
Yeah.
like because
they knew.
because it was Uncle Sal.
They knew.
But yeah,
They knew what your mom was like.
Yeah, they didn't say anything about my mom.
Well, they're not
They
going to
just said
tell
I-
a little kid
They
that.
just said I
They're
looked
not
like
going to
Uncle
tell a
Sal.
little kid that.
I looked like Uncle Sal.
Anyway, Conspiracy Corner. We're going to take up a collection for the DNA test that Scott tested with his dad to see if he's really his dad or if he's
Oh
not
my
his
God.
cousin.
My dad.
What if your dad's your cousin?
My dad will just lose his mind.
Well, then we got to film him getting found out.
Yeah,
We're going to do it like a Maury episode. We're going to have a
We're
seat.
not.
Have a seat.
We are not.
Scott's dad, please have a seat.
Yeah, we are not doing that.
We're doing it like a Maury episode. Scott, you get to be Maury, Matt,
All right.
because you don't know his dad. So it'll be
And Matt will be like, "You are not the father."
He's like, yes. How does that really hurt if your dad was just like excited? It's like,
Oh,
not my fault. I knew that bitch was a hoe.
Wow.
If your dad said that, that would be funny, wouldn't it?
Wow. You know, George, there's so many lines you cross. I mean,
Yeah, but that's why it's fun.
Yeah.
This is Conspiracy Corner.
So many lines you cross.
This is Conspiracy Corner. That's what we do. Thanks everybody for listening. Matt, thanks for being a part of this on a permanent basis.
Wait a
You've
minute.
been on almost every episode
Wait a minute.
that we've done in the last year.
Was there
I have
anything
something-
about Hanson and Dyer that anybody else wanted to say? Matt?
We spent most of this episode talking about current events again.
Yeah.
I appreciated
happens.
the focus on losing critical thinking from Western education.
Yep.
One of my own another note that I had was that they discussed the biological origins of war and the evolution of warfare versus human nature.
Yes.
That's everything I had. I had something fun to say about this podcast if we're closing it up.
Please.
Okay, so you remember way back early on when you folks started doing this thing, and I started being interactive with it. Excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
and I started seeing what you were doing. I came up with the idea that, if Dan's episodes are the tip of the iceberg, you guys cut that iceberg up into chunks, build an igloo, sit down inside, and have a conversation.
Yes.
Oh,
I love that.
Just
analogy.
you're gonna
tonight
get me
while
all
we were
choked up here, Matt.
So just tonight I came up with an updated version of that.
Okay.
So you know how we were talking about how news publications will take a single sentence from a celebrity's, conversation and write an entire article about it.
Right.
Okay, so my favorite band is Led Zeppelin, and I learned that the guitarist from Slayer, this is something I heard, he would actually take little minute snippets from Jimmy Page guitar solos and slow them down and take 5 notes from them and build that into an entire riff for a Slayer song.
Wow.
That's what I'm kind of calling what you guys do now, because we
Nice.
took one sentence from these episodes and talked about them for a half an hour each.
That's awesome. And that's fun. And there's a lot of questions, a lot to be had. There's so much context and content in what Dan creates. And most of the fun things I love about hardcore history is when I get to have great conversations with friends about that topic. I love listening to them. And then I'll be like, hey, did you think about this about Genghis Khan? And that's how this whole thing started, is Scott and I love to talk about hardcore history episodes. And now, Matt, you're a perfect person to join us.
That's
for this,
why I
so we
built
really
the server
appreciate it.
to do exactly that same thing, man.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
people, if you're just listening to this and you haven't checked out the Discord server, Hardcore History Discussions, please do. Join in. We have great conversations. There's also a news and politics chat that is more for current events. And things get a little spicy once in a while. Scott goes in there and trolls everybody, says the Earth's flat and space is fake. Scott thinks birds aren't real, but that's the next conspiracy corner.
They're
Birds
government
aren't real.
robots.
They're robots. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Go watch the old episodes and then jump in the chat and start telling us what you think of them. But I'm pro Victor Davis Hanson. He's the man.
Well,
all right, everybody. Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.
Peace out.